Yo, what is up, guys? Snap here. Today we're going to be talking about Atlas strategies, party strategies, MFing, all that stuff for groups in the 325 expansion for Settlers of the Calgur. There are some pretty massive meta shakeups here due to all of the changes to Scarabs, as well as the removal of quantity from gear. If you're unaware, on the patch, all item quantity on characters has been removed. And now really the only way to get item quantity on your character is going to be via the Horned Scarab of Glittering. This gives you 100% increase item quantity, which is plenty high enough to give you enough quantity to start hitting diminishing returns. Coupled with the fact that we gained a Scarab slot from the map device, I would say this change is going to be like a net neutral in terms of item generation in your map. Yes, we lost the quantity on gear, but we can just simply replace it with the Horned Scarab of Glittering, and because we gained the map device slot, it's really just a wash if you compare it to the last league. The big changes, however, are going to come from here, which is going to be the changes to the Scarabs. The Reliquary Scarab has basically just been removed, and it is now giving you 2% damage, toughness, and rarity per pack size to unique monsters, and this Titanic of Overlords gives you 2 additional rewards to unique monsters. I imagine the Scarab is probably not going to be very powerful in comparison to the old Reliquary Scarab. Additionally, the base Div Scarab has also been removed and or changed. It now just spawns a pack of monsters that drop divination cards. Duration has also been removed and or replaced with the Divination Scarab of Pilfering as a unique mechanic which sucks up the cards and dupes them at the end. Even though we did lose a substantial amount of div cards or rarity through the Scarabs, we did get some compensation in the form of these Chisels. We have the Maven's Chisel of Divination, Procurement, Proliferation, and Scarabs. This does give you various buffs to item rarity, div cards, pack size, and Scarabs. Now, the two that jump out in a party is of course going to be div cards and rarity. Pack size might see a few use cases, but immediately you're probably going to jump to rarity and div cards. Now, first let's go over a div card angle in the new patch. Now, Fubgun has kind of made a video on this particular topic, so I'm just going to be reiterating what is possible here or might be possible on the new patch. We don't exactly know how this Scarab will work, but essentially you kill some monsters in the map and the map boss will suck up those div cards, and when you kill that map boss, it will dupe all of the cards that have been stolen and drop them to the ground. Now, what's important here is that this Scarab reads final map boss. This is important because destructive play reads modifiers to final map boss in each map also apply to these summoned bosses. Additionally, there is the Domination Scarab of Terrors, which also does the same thing. It applies those modifiers to the final map bosses to the bosses that are spawned by the shrine. Now, it's a little unclear as to how this exactly will work in conjunction with the Scarab. There's a few possibilities, some a little less likely, and some I think will be a little more likely. The least likely situation here is that you kill a mob, the first boss you kill will have the card, and it will dupe it and give it to the next boss, which will dupe it again, which is quadratic scaling of div cards per boss you add to the map, which I think is obviously the least likely situation we have here for the div cards. The next situation would be is you have one boss killed, which will drop 2 div cards, and the next boss you kill will exactly drop those 2 div cards as well because they're not interacting with each other. And that would be linear scaling of cards per map boss you add. And then I think the last and probably most likely scenario for these div cards is that the pool of div cards that is sucked up into the boss is cleared for each map boss you kill. If it is the third scenario where the map pool is cleared on killing the first boss, divination card farming is frankly just dead in the water, and there's absolutely no reason to pursue divination cards because the multipliers just frankly aren't there. And the opportunity cost of leaving a bunch of rarity from the Chisels and other sources is just too much. So this is one to keep an eye on. I'm sure some testers in Standard will figure out exactly how this is work and whether or not this is worth interacting with. If this does work how we might think it does, and it maybe has linear scaling perhaps per boss you add, it is possible that if you were to drop an apothecary before you've killed any of the bosses, that you would walk away from the map with 40 apothecaries. But conceptually, you think about that in your head, and it's probably not going to work that way, right? There is some other abuse you can do with destructive play on Silo, where you can actually kill the map bosses that it spawns without actually having to kill the end map boss, meaning that you can continually put Maven influence on the map over and over again without breaking it by witnessing the end boss. So it's just something to keep an eye out. I'm sure we'll know in 10 minutes when the patch goes live whether or not this Scarab even does anything useful. I guess it's just kind of useless, but yeah, that's going over all of the divination card angles on this patch. There is, however, a lot of interesting things you can do with item rarity this patch. Now, obviously, we have a lot of item rarity on our Kohler in a 6-man, and so item rarity via the Maven's Chisels is very appealing here. There's a few things you can do to leverage as much rarity on your map as possible. The first thing to mention here is obviously going to be Kirak rarity. Now, there is a mod which is found exclusively by buying Kirak maps from the Kirak the vendor here, which reads, this map's modifiers to quantity of items found also apply to rarity. This can turn a map like this, which has 99 quant and 137 rarity, into a map like this that ends up with 248% rarity and 170 quant after all of the effective modifiers. And the funny thing about this is that with the new chisel, it is more rarity. And so this is going to be a more multiplier that you get to the rarity here. This can bump the rarity of these maps probably past 500% if you're using the rarity chisel. And so this is definitely something to look out for on the new patch. There are a few problems with this strategy, however, in that one, you cannot be choosing your own layout. It's kind of is just whatever natural maps are on the atlas here. And the two, it's impossible to get Elder or Conquer influence on them as well. The other thing to mention here is that this modifier double dips with altars. When you find an altar with quant and rarity, it gets the quantity, and that quantity also gets gained as rarity. And so the altars double dip. And so you do get very, very high rarity maps when you do manage to find a few quant rarity altars. So one angle is, of course, Kirak rarity maps. That is definitely going to be an option if you want to juice rarity. Now, of course, with the new change on the patch notes that let us apply delirium orbs to T17s, I imagine the top end is, of course, just going to turn into T17s because they have better pack size and slightly better drops on average. You can get some obscene numbers of rarity here on the map. This is the highest rarity you could possibly get on the map, but it's around 330%. So if you imagine you could put the new chisels on it, this is going to be 660% rarity before you even have any effective modifiers or anything like that, which is just absolutely bonkers, right? You can now put 5 orbs delirium on these, and with the delirium buffs on the patch, hopefully this is feeling very good. And so I imagine that this is where the meta is going to go at the top end. Wouldn't be surprised if people get some altars going in the map. You could see, 1,000 rarity on the tooltip if you have the rarity chisel going here. But these maps are going to be exceptionally difficult, especially if you're putting 5 delirium orbs on them. And then the last thing to consider when you're going for a rarity angle is, of course, going to be 8 mod unidentified Conqueror map. This is now possible via the 2 new Scarabs, the Cartography Scarab of Corruption, in conjunction with the Influencing Scarab of Conversion, would force all of the maps to be Shaper, Elder, and Conch, and then they would also be 8 mod unidentified. This means you can get bonus quantity from the unidentified bonus, also guaranteeing them to be 8 mods. However, you do need to be prepared to run every single map mod in this case. This can add a lot of density and pack size, that kind of thing, but I think there's a huge downside to this in the patch, and is that you cannot use the new chisels because the maps are unidentified. Big downside. Perhaps maybe the pack size you get from all of the Conqueror mobs you get can make up the difference, but it's really hard to tell before the patch, of course. So those are kind of the basics of the changes to rarity and maybe some things you want to look out for on the new patch. I'm also going to be including this text document here, which has all of our progression passive trees and also some potential end game trees here. As for our Atlas progression here, we're just going for a standard Atlas prog here, and we're going for June, Shrines, Unwavering Vision, and the full tree looks something a little bit like this. When you get to the end game very quickly, destructive play is super lucrative. It just generates tons of Guardian maps and tons of Conch maps and that kind of thing, and you can just sell them. It is a very good way to leverage the fact that you're fast to the end game because everybody needs those Guardian maps for completion. So destructive play is something you want to do if you're pushing the Atlas very fast. It's very good money maker. The June investment over here is just simply for safe houses. If you have a large party and everybody's doing safe houses, it is an excellent way to get XP if you do them in rotation. Definitely something you want to look into if you have a large party. But yeah, all the progression trees will be here. It's not dissimilar to what we've done in the past in terms of Atlas progression. As for the currency farming group, that is going to be the Orabot, the bow guy, and then also our Warcry support. We are, of course, doing the tried and true Ruckus. It did eat a little bit of a nerf with the ghost changes on the patch, but it is still probably going to be one of the best ways to generate chaos recipe if you can buy the Scarabs, that is the Anarchy Scarabs, and just put them on your map for consistent ring drops, jewelry drops, so you can just rice it into chaos recipe. It is very, very good. As for the end game trees here, I'm going to include 3 different variants. One of them that's probably targeted at Kirak rarity, one of them that's targeted at 5 orb max T17s, and another one that goes a little bit into Conquer. They're very similar, just with a few different nodes clicked. So I'm just going to go over primarily the 5 orb T17 tree here. This particular tree is probably very similar to what you've seen for max investment Delirium Beyond shenanigans. Essentially, it just grabs all the map effect, it grabs all the Beyond stuff, it grabs all of the map effect at the top tat here. But interestingly, we are going to go for a little bit of a blight focus here. I do think blights are extremely strong, and if you do juice them properly, they can add 1,500, maybe even 2,000 monsters to your map. And so for the point investment on the tree, you can just grab these to get the blight chance here. You can also grab these nodes, immune response down here. Super good node, very, very good for the points. Past that, you can invest in mechanics like incursion, because if they do spawn a bunch of blue mobs, it is a very good way to generate uniques. Tons of stuff out of those blue alvas. Very, very good and very point efficient points there. You aren't necessarily clicking the ritual. You're just there to get the monsters that spawn alongside the ritual. And then the rest of the tree is just some pretty standard stuff. Top hat, get the quant, get the effect, grab the influence over here. It's all pretty standard stuff. Talking about juicing endgame in terms of Scarabs and 6-ban, you're going to basically have to be using 2 mandatory Scarabs every map. That is, of course, going to be Glittering and then the Carto of Risk, which adds an additional map mod. Glittering is, of course, mandatory because we no longer are able to get quantity on our gear. The Carto of Risk similarly is mandatory because of how much quantity it can add to the map. It's been well known for a long time how powerful adding additional map mods to the map can be in terms of quantity. If you think back to prior leagues, we've had tons of leagues where 8 mod mapping was the meta, and that's simply just because they have more quantity, because they have more map mods. So I imagine that this Carto Risk Scarab is just going to become a mandatory slot. The rest of the Scarabs can be a mix of any of the good general juice Scarabs. There are a lot of possibilities, and I do think it is going to be very difficult to predict what is exactly good here. I think the Wisp Scarabs have potential. The Nemesis Scarab, obviously, Hunted Traders is a good mix-in. The Blight stuff is pretty interesting. And then obviously you can juice up your Beyond with the Awakening Scarab as well. So there's a lot of options. You got a lot of experimentation to do. The main thing you want to put on is just Glittering and Carto of Risk, and then you can kind of mix in these Scarabs to feel what's good. There's a possibility in which you put on 3 of the Wisp Scarabs and you spawn a Wildwood and you get crazy Wildwood maps. That's definitely a thing that could happen, but we're just going to have to try and see what's good. But hopefully this is giving you some sort of framework to work around to try and do some experimentation when the patch hits, because honestly, the patch shakeup is so big. I think it's going to be very difficult to just predict what's going to be good here. So we ourselves are going to have to be doing a lot of experimentation here. But that should about sum up all of the Atlas strats we're going to be doing here. Once again, you can check out the text document if you want the specific Atlas trees. If you guys have any questions, comments, anything like that, you can just leave them in the YouTube comments. I try to answer as many people as I can. And once again, I'm Snap, and thanks for watching.